Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, ciao, bonjour, namaste, jumbo, bienvenidos. Hey, my name is Jet Lee. Welcome to Reading with Your Kids. We are coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are so very honored and absolutely delighted that you join us in our mission to help all families grow closer through reading. We do that by sharing fun, thoughtful, and thought-provoking conversations with fascinating people who just happen to be writing books for kids of all ages. You can help us in that mission by telling all of your family and friends about the show and letting them know that they can hear us on the WREB AM/FM 24/7 radio network. And they can find us on the iHeartRadio app, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Good Pods, Podcast Addict, wherever you find your favorite shows. We're also speaking today to somebody who is creating fantastic podcast content for kids. Our first guest is Jerry Kolber. He is the driving force behind Atomic Entertainment, and he is here to celebrate his brand new kids podcast. It's called Who Smarted? And later on in the show, we'll be speaking to MB Mooney, who will be celebrating Shield of the King. Before we invite our guests into the studio, we want to let you know that this episode of Reading with Your Kids is brought to you by Ken, the beautiful book by Carolyn Nunez Vasquez. What do bears, foxes, eagles, deer, coyote, rabbits, and nature have in common? They can all teach human beings important lessons. And when we learn to pay attention to nature, we learn so much about living in harmony. All animals have kinship to each other. We can all learn from others, bringing the message home that even though people come in all shapes, sizes, and colors, we are all human and all kin. The book Ken uses folklore to teach readers fantastic lessons for life. Get your copy today. Ken by Carolyn Nunez Vasquez. Hey there, families! Are you looking for an exciting way to bond and learn together? Look no further than our STEM is Family Fun video series. Join us as we explore the fascinating world of STEM through hands-on activities right in your own home. Our series features lessons from experts at renowned institutions like the San Diego Children's Discovery Museum, the National Children's Museum in Washington, D.C., and Children's Museum Houston. From making homemade rainbow bridges to creating an oboe out of a straw, there's something for everyone in the family to enjoy. So grab your lab coats and get ready for an adventure. Go to readingwithyourkids.com and click on the STEM is Family Fun link at the top of the page and let the learning and laughter begin. STEM is Family Fun, where learning and bonding go hand in hand. My friends, I am so excited. You know, podcasting, I've had so much fun doing Reading with Your Kids. I want to introduce you to a podcast that you and your kids can listen to together. Coming to us from New York City, our guest is the founder and the driving force behind Atomic Entertainment and a brand new podcast called Who Smarted? Please welcome to the show, Jerry Kolber. Jerry, how are you?
I'm good, Jed. Thank you. It's great to be here.
Excited to have you on. I gave Who Smarted a listen, and what a fun show.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, we have a lot of fun making it, and the whole idea is to make it fun for kids to learn and for parents to learn with them. So that's the whole idea behind it, is have fun learning.
We're going to give, in one of our future episodes, we're going to give folks a chance to listen to Who Smarted here on our feed, but until then, tell us a little bit about what we can expect when we download an episode.
Sure. So Who Smarted is basically, we think of it as the kind of daily podcast for kids and families. And it's a scripted show where every episode we take you on a journey somewhere through science, history, pop culture, how things work. You're going to learn about everything from space, food, human digestion, geography, animals. I mean, we've done 500 almost episodes at this point. We come out 3 or 4 times a week, depending on the season. And every episode is about 15 minutes long, so we keep it short, fun, and simple. And we designed the show to be really fun for kids to listen to and get curious and excited about all of these topics they may know about or may not know about. And we wanted to make sure that parents would have fun listening too. And we know that works because we sometimes hear from parents who say, I listen to Who Smarted with my kid on the way to school, and my guilty pleasure is I keep it on after they get out of the car. So the mission accomplished.
Excellent. I think listening to podcasts, listening to audiobooks with your kids in the car is such a great use of time, especially when you consider that a lot of the music that we find on a lot of music stations, not sure if you want to be listening to that with your kids.
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, audiobooks for kids were always interesting to me, and it was one of the inspirations for Who Smarted, because you always hear from parents, car rides are tough because kids are, going nuts in the back seat or maybe they're playing video games, and that's not necessarily the best use of their time. And so when we realized that parents were using audiobooks in the car, we thought, well, why don't we make a podcast that's fresh, free, fun, comes out all the time. That's, the perfect length for car rides. And so, we hear from parents all the time that they sometimes use Who Smarted in as a car ride, fun diversion, or other podcasts or audiobooks. So you're right on the nose. Like, that's exactly where we see the show fitting into people's lives.
Yeah. So I was real surprised to learn, and I'm very pleasantly surprised to learn that kids are listening to podcasts. Do we have any statistics as to the number of kids and families that are in the audience?
So the latest statistic we saw said that just over 40% of children between 6 and 15 have listened to at least part of a podcast every week in the United States. We don't have research that says how many of them are listening to podcasts that are designed for kids. So they could be listening to, there's lots of adult podcasts that kids might enjoy. But a huge number of children are listening to podcasts. The challenge we found is, like what you just said, which is a lot of people don't even know there's podcasts for kids. And so one of our challenges is not just making people aware of Who Smarted, but making people aware that there's Who Smarted, and there's a bunch of other great podcasts for kids. They're all educational. They're all fun. There's probably about 15 or 20 that we recommend depending on what the family wants. Of course, we always recommend Who Smarted, but there's a bunch of other great shows from American Public Media. There's shows like Kid News. That's a daily news show for kids. And honestly, once parents find out about these podcasts for kids and the fact that they're free, they can put them on anytime, they get hooked. They get into it. So that's been a challenge for us over the last years. Just making people even aware that these shows for kids exist.
Yeah. I was real surprised when we launched Reading with Your Kids. It was all about introducing parents to authors of all genres of kids literature. I never dreamed that the kids would be listening to the show, and we still aren't creating content on this show for kids. However, I was real surprised. I was at a homeschooling conference. It was a weekend long thing. There were parents and kids there, and I was surprised at the number of kids who were coming up to us on day 2 saying, "Hey, I listened to that your interview with this author or that author," and it was really a lot of fun.
That's so cool. I love that. Yeah. We kids love learning, and kids love thinking, and your show is great. I mean, I've listened to a bunch of your episodes, and whether you're talking to an author or you're talking to an expert on some sort of behavioral issue, it's definitely for adults, but it's also information that kids would probably, maybe if they don't get all of it, your show is appealing to kids because you're talking about stuff that's relevant to kids. So,
awesome. Yeah. So you've been involved in creating content for kids for a while. Tell us a little bit about Atomic Entertainment and the other things that you're involved in, please.
Yeah, happy to. So we, the first show that we ever did ended up being for kids was Accidentally for Kids. And it was, it was a show we created for National Geographic Channel called Brain Games. And it was a really fun show about how your brain works. And so our idea for that show was we wanted to make a show for adults who would, if you said the word neuroscience, would run from the room because it sounds just automatically like something they're not going to understand. And so we said, how can we teach people about how their brain works, and also in the process teach them that they can understand how their brain works. They can understand neuroscience and psychology. So Brain Games became this very fun show where you're watching the show, but you're playing along with the show and playing games and really learning about your brain. And it ended up becoming a huge, huge hit for National Geographic Channel. And when they looked at the ratings, they said, wow, the average age comes down almost 40 years from all our other shows to very, like a number that is rarely seen in a primetime show for adults. It was something like 30 years old. And they very quickly figured out that it was because kids were watching with their parents, which was unusual for Nat Geo. Most shows in primetime on Nat Geo were for adults only and didn't have a kids audience. And when we learned that, it changed how we thought about that show. Obviously changed how we thought about some of the topics, but it also just got really exciting for us because we started hearing from kids, emails coming in and letters coming in saying that they now wanted to study neuroscience or go into psychology because of the show, or that we'd help them understand something they were struggling with. And so, that made us realize, wow, there's an audience for a show for kids, really just for kids. And so the next thing we did was a show called Brainchild, which obviously from the title is a show for children, that we did for Netflix. And it explored everything from space to motivation, to goal setting, to emotion, to social media, all the stuff that kids think about and that no one was really talking to them about in an adult way. And so we did this show Brainchild, that was on Netflix. It's still on Netflix, still does very well, for them. And, we did that show actually with Pharrell Williams and his creative partner, Mimi Valdez, which actually made that Brainchild became an opportunity to also really explore diversity in the show and really let all kinds of kids see themselves represented. And then after that, we hit the pandemic and we were getting ready to do, whether it was more Brainchild or another show, we couldn't shoot anything. And so we had all of these incredible writers and actors and everyone on payroll. And, we thought, we've always wanted to do a podcast for kids. This is the perfect time. We can't shoot anything. Kids are stuck on their screens. So let's make something educational that gets them off the screen and it's fun. And that's how Who Smarted got started. And so we just sort of, honestly, Jed, we just seem to keep getting deeper and deeper into the world of kids education and family education. And it's so fun and gratifying, as I'm sure you experience, like when you hear from fans of the podcast and parents, and you just know you're making a difference in people's lives. That's what keeps us going and keeps us growing. So, that's the history of how we've ended up here with this awesome kid show.
One of the reasons the reason I launched Reading with Your Kids is because I know the bond that I have with my now adult kids, 28 and 30, started and was built on a foundation of reading and reading together and continuing to read together after they became independent readers. And then that turned into throwing the ball around, going to movies together, listening to music together, and watching TV together. So, as you're talking about all the kids watching TV, watching your Nat Geo show with their parents, it reminded me, I just had Joe Gatto from Impractical Jokers on the podcast, celebrating his first kids book. And Impractical Jokers was one of those shows that I watched with my daughter as she was growing up. And it was just like, hey, and it was just such a great time to continue to build that bond. And I want to encourage all our listeners out there, just because your kids are growing up and they are doing what they should be doing, which is to try to become independent and break away from you, it doesn't mean that they don't want to do stuff with you. And watching and listening to podcasts, it's a great way to continue doing that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was, I don't know you obviously, but I was reading a little about you. Your background's really interesting because you've been doing work with kids for a long time. Like you were, as I understand it, were doing anti-bullying work back in the day, and that's morphed into this work. So, just a thank you to you for doing so much amazing and empowering work with kids and families.
Well, thank you. It's been a blessing. I made a living doing educational magic shows and addressing topics like substance abuse and and bullying for 35 years. And talk about a fun trip, man. I'm telling you. I'm almost 100 years old, so dragging my equipment in almost 300 times a year isn't attractive to me anymore, but I still love getting out there and performing. Tell us if we always ask authors for advice for aspiring authors. I'm imagining there might be some people listening to the show who are thinking, maybe I can create a podcast for kids. Or maybe there's a kid listening to this with their parents who think, I want to start a podcast. I mean, I was creating what we call tape radio shows way back in the prehistoric times on little cassette tapes with my friends when I was in 8th grade. What advice would you give to someone who wants to create fun, entertaining, and educational content for kids?
Sure. So first of all, that's literally how I got started doing this. I would make radio shows where we would take one radio player and record in the other one and record stuff. So I think we're probably in roughly the same generation where that was the way you did it. You know, you had cassette tapes. But honestly, like, to me, that's sort of the genesis of all of this. I think we live in an age of information overload. So if you go online and you type in, how do I start a podcast? You're going to get like hundreds and hundreds of pages of hits. I mean, it's a very popular search. Lots of people want to do it. And it's very easy to get overwhelmed with all the advice about the technology, the microphone, the app to use, how to post, where to post, how to promote, all of that. I say, forget all of that. Pretend you just have a cassette tape and a microphone, right? Because at the core of starting a podcast is, do you have something to say? Do you have something unique to say? Do you have something that other people want to listen to that they're going to benefit from? I think pretty much everyone does, kids and adults. And whether that's a scripted show, a news show, a show about your experience, the easiest way to start is, we all have one of these or access to one of these. We all have a phone, and on that phone there's a program called voice memos. It might be, depending on what, every phone has some sort of like recording device, recording app. And just start recording, and start by talking through what is the show. Like, almost imagine you're doing like a 3-minute introductory episode telling me about what your podcast is, and record it and play it back for yourself and your friends, and just sort of start playing there. Next step from that would be really just coming up with maybe a name for the show, a 1-sentence description that tells me what the show is about, and then come up with 10 episode ideas. You don't have to write them. That's our first litmus test here for any show is, can we come up with a name, a log line, that describes the show, and the name, and just like the titles or subjects for 10 episodes. And if we can do that pretty quickly, we know we have at least a germ of an idea that's worth pursuing. But I would advise, it's pretty easy when you strip away all of the craziness and all of the different advice. You really just need a microphone, an editing software, and to post the show on a platform like Apple, which you can do for, a few dollars a month. There's a little more to it than that, but the core of it is, start recording. I mean, honestly, that's my advice, because as I'm sure you and me, we could go back and listen to early episodes of our shows and go, man, I wish I knew that what I know now about all this stuff. But you know what? People listened. It didn't matter that our early shows didn't sound great, or that they were too long, or the pace was wrong, or anything like that. People listened because we had something to say, and it was fun. So,
yeah. Good advice. Speaking of, creating those 10 episode ideas and the title, is there anything cooking in the kitchen over at Atomic Entertainment that we might look out for?
Yeah, actually, not only cooking, but actually just out of the oven, if we're going to extend the metaphor. So we just launched another educational show called Mysteries About True Histories. And we call this, it's a very fun adventure show about these two kids who go on adventures through space and time, with a device from one of their aunts. And we say this is the show where we've hidden math, right? Even in the title, Mysteries About True Histories, MATH. We, over the last few years with Who Smarted, we get asked more often by parents and teachers to do a show that helps their kids learn about math and logic than anything else. And we really, we workshopped this and thought about it and developed for a couple of years. internally, also with outside consultants. And we eventually landed on this concept called Mysteries About True Histories. It's also on the Kids and Family podcast charts now. And it's just a super fun adventure show that you kind of accidentally learn about math and logic and critical thinking along the way. So that's just out of the oven, I guess is the way to put it. But that's out now and starting to do really well.
That's really exciting. Well, one of the things we've talked about here on the show is that so many subjects like math and history and science can be so much fun.
Yes.
But it seems like a lot of kids just get turned off by the way they're taught and presented in traditional school settings.
Yeah, that was me. I mean, I actually had to go speak a couple of years ago when we were doing brain games at the National Science Teacher conference. And I started my speech to them by saying, if any of my science teachers from high school thought that I would be standing here speaking to science teachers because I've created and produced National Geographic's biggest science show, they would tell you, you must be on something, because this kid does not like science. But I loved science. I loved science. I was fascinated by math and numbers, and I did so badly in school. And I just couldn't understand the way it was taught. And my teachers were good teachers. Other kids were learning, not all of them, but other kids were. But we do have, by necessity, our country has kind of a one-size-fits-all approach in any classroom. Teachers just don't have the bandwidth to adapt to kids with different learning styles, whether it's because you're going to learn more visually or more experientially, maybe you're neurodivergent and mildly, and you're not connecting with the material because of that. And so our whole DNA of this company, from Brain Games, Brainchild, Who Smarted, Mysteries About True Histories, is all stuff that I kind of wish, existed when I was a kid, because I would have actually learned better from the shows I'm making as a kid. So that's why I get so excited about this stuff, because I feel like we're making shows for kids who learn traditionally, but also who have struggles, and we hear that from parents all the time. We hear from parents of autistic kids almost weekly that their kids are able to listen to Who Smarted and get excited about topics that they weren't able to get excited about in classrooms. So that just makes us so happy.
I wish that new show was available when my son was in middle school, because math, he's one of those kids who does everything in his head, and it's always right. But the biggest challenge was he would get failing grades because he didn't show his work. And I would sit down with the teachers, and they said, I can't give him a passing grade. He doesn't show his work. It's always right. He doesn't. I know he knows how to do it, but he doesn't show the work. So I have to fail him. And I'm like, this is crazy.
So silly. Silly. Yeah,
absolutely.
And it's not their fault, because they're told that that's how they have to do it.
Right.
Yeah.
Very, very. I really hope that schools will get on the bandwagon of using alternatives like podcasts to get their kids excited about these different subjects.
Yeah, it's interesting, Jed, because we've had a hard time getting the schools excited at the school level, and I think that's just going to be a longer process. And it's not just us, but other podcasts as well that we talk to them about that are incredibly valuable. But at the teacher level, we know we have several thousand teachers using Who Smarted in classrooms around the country. We know Kid News gets used by teachers all around the country as a source of news for their kids. So the teachers are figuring it out. The other place we just hear from all the time is homeschool parents. And I'm so impressed by homeschool parents, because not only is it so much work, but they come up with ways to teach their kids that are special and unique and adapted to the kids. And they can do that, obviously, because they've got, 4 kids or 2 kids, whatever, not 30 kids. But they're using Who Smarted a lot as a way to get kids excited about a subject or to take a break in the homeschool. And so we're starting to see the ways that Who Smarted can really fit into a classroom or a homeschool. And then again, the challenge is just especially at the school level, just starting to get awareness and acceptance of kids podcasts, even as just a concept. So, yeah.
We should tell everybody where they can go to find out more about Who Smarted and also find out more about Atomic Entertainment.
Sure. So Atomic Entertainment is atomicentertainment.com, spelled just like it sounds. ATM, that's not how it's spelled. ATOMIC. There you go. Entertainment.com. Who Smarted, you can find at whosmarted.com. But also on any podcast app, just look for Who Smarted. And you can also look for Mysteries About True Histories if you want to check out our math show on any podcast app. You'll find it.
And Jerry's probably not going to list all the different podcast apps you can find it on because, like me, he probably doesn't know all the different podcast apps that are out there that are carrying our shows.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say we get like 90% of our listenership is either on the Apple Podcasts app or on the Spotify podcast app. So those seem to be the ones that people know about. And there are others. But yeah, like you said, I couldn't name them.
We've had a great time speaking to the driving force behind Atomic Entertainment and a great kids podcast called Who Smarted. Our guest has been Jerry Kolber. Jerry, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you, Jed. This was a real pleasure.
Are you looking for a creative way to bond with your kids? Let me tell you all about Drawing with Your Kids, the ultimate destination for artistic adventures. Join us as we dive into the wonderful world of children's books with renowned illustrators guiding you step by step. From beloved characters to whimsical scenes, unleash your imagination and create cherished memories together. Whether you're a seasoned artist or just picking up a pencil, there's something for everyone at Drawing with Your Kids. Please visit our website, readingwithyourkids.com, and click on the Drawing with Your Kids link at the top of the page and let the creativity flow. Drawing with Your Kids, where every stroke brings stories to life. Join us right now from right outside of Atlanta in the state of Georgia. Our guest is here today to celebrate his epic YA fantasy. It's called Shield of the King. Please welcome to the show, M.B. Mooney. Hey, my friend, how are you?
I am doing really well. It's a little cloudy outside, but that kind of cools down the hot Atlanta weather, so I'm feeling pretty good. And I'm really excited to be talking to you.
Well, I'm excited to have you on the podcast. Atlanta is one of my favorite places. It is a great, vibrant city, but I guess like a lot of the South, when it gets hot, it gets really hot.
It gets really hot. And Boston is one of my favorite cities. You know, we were talking before we started recording. I was a history major first. That was my first lifestyle, was a history teacher. So, yes, all the history there in Boston, especially through the Revolutionary War and beyond, is just really special. So, yeah, I dig it.
You know, you and I were talking before we started recording, and I was telling you about this young Italian woman who stayed with us while she was studying in Boston. And talking about history, I took her, when she first arrived, I took her into Boston and was showing her around. And I remember at one point I pointed to a building and I said, and this is almost 400 years old.
Oh, right. You're right. Yeah.
And meanwhile, she was not impressed. And
no.
After visiting Italy in March, I can understand why.
Yeah, like 3,000-year-old buildings or something, and like they're little towns with buildings that are 1,000 years old. So yeah, for sure.
It is wild. So tell me about Shield of the King.
Yeah, so Shield of the King is about Elowin. It's Elowin Book 1. It's the first book in her series. And she's a young elf. She's a young teen elf, and she lives with her father, and her mom's not around, and she dreams of being a hero. And then when her father is sort of recruited back out of retirement to help protect the king from an assassination attempt, she makes sure she goes with him so that she can try to put into practice all the training and stuff that she says so she can be a hero. But along the way, she really gets disenfranchised because she hasn't really experienced the world. And so along the way, she has to figure out, what does it mean to be a hero in a world that there's no clear good or bad guys. There's no, everybody seems corrupt. Every side seems like they're not the right side. And so she has to kind of navigate that as she goes through the story and protecting the king, but also kind of figuring out what does it mean to be a hero in a very, very divided world. So that's her story.
I'm imagining that there are probably a lot of young people these days that are kind of finding themselves in Elowin's shoes in terms of, like, hey, we're really divided, and there are heroes and villains on both sides of the political spectrum here.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, and I think I think it's not just young people, but young people make up the majority of this, because it was Wall Street Journal or somebody did a poll recently, getting people to identify themselves as Republican or Democrat, right? And for the first time, independence was over 50%. Mm-hmm. People who would not identify with either Republican or Democrat was like 51, 52%. And a majority of those were young people who said they don't feel either party is out for their good, is out to do anything good. So they're just declaring themselves independent. And I think you're right. I think with social media and some of the clickbait stuff and just some of the stuff that young people deal with, it's very difficult to find the sort of, heroes, to find the sort of people to look up to that maybe we thought we had. Maybe they weren't worthy of it, but that we might have thought that we had when we were younger. And so as they're growing up in this world, I really tried to speak into that. What does it mean to find your own path that doesn't necessarily reject both sides, but tries to dignify all people, not participate in some of the false narratives that are going on. You either have to choose my side or this side, or you're out, or whatever. And so what does it mean to be a hero where you dignify all people, where you love all people, you protect all people, not just one side or the other?
Yeah. I'm curious, did you go in to the story with that, I don't know if it's message, but with that perspective in the front of your mind, or did this just kind of occur naturally as you were creating this universe and these characters?
It's a little both. I definitely wanted, as most of YA has coming of age themes to them, right? Most YA books have some level of coming of age themes to them. And yes, I have teenagers, right? My three kids are 18, 16, and 14. And these are the kind of conversations we have all the time. What do the Republicans say about this? Or how can we not criticize it, but how can we look at it a little objectively? These are what the Democrats say. And they're lobbing insults at each other, but what is the issue, and what do we think about it? And so I've gone through that, and my wife is a high school teacher, so I know a lot of teens and have spoken not only with my own kids but with others, where I think this is a part of helping kids grow up, is to think for themselves, to take the ideas of right and wrong and not sort of appropriate them to some political agenda necessarily. Like, just say, okay, this is what's right and wrong. Now we can look at that independently from what people are saying and think critically about that. And of course, I like swords and action, and so I put it in a realm where there's rebellion, there's civil war, and she thinks she's on one side, but then she realizes the corruption of her own side, as well as the corruption of people she thought were her enemy, and maybe they weren't as much her enemy as she thought, and maybe and so just that sort of complexity, while still the simplicity of all people have value, and all lives should be protected, and and that sort of stuff. So I definitely went into it with those sort of themes in mind. But, I already had a world built out, so to speak. I had a lot of the world building done because I really fell in love with this character she was part of a different series, and I wanted to kind of tell her story separately. So I kind of already had the world built out, and I kind of wanted to explore some of how she came to be who she was,
Yeah. What's the, I love talking to fantasy authors about their process in building the worlds and whatnot. What's the neatest aspect of the world, the universe that you created for this story?
Wow, what's the neatest part? For me, I like kind of creating a world that has some connection to our history. So when I come up with different cultures and different types of governments. So, when I taught social studies and history, I taught American history. So I was a teacher first. That was my first sort of big boy job, as it were. And I taught history. I taught geography. I taught political science. I taught all these sort of things. And so to me, kind of being creative with that stuff and using them in different sort of facets and aspects and then writing stories of characters who have to deal with that world, who have to navigate as generally misfits, because that's kind of how I feel. I feel like a misfit. And that's part of why for Elowin that theme was in my mind. I feel like a misfit. I feel like I don't fit, in two sides that are fighting on things. I feel like, I can kind of see a little of both or whatever. And so I feel like a misfit sometimes. And so my characters are kind of misfits in some of these worlds, but I get to be creative and make it, magical and have monsters and do all that stuff while still kind of bringing in my love of sort of history and government and those sort of structures.
Cool. Do you remember, we're talking, you were mentioning that Elowin kind of finds out that the people that she looked up to, the heroes, aren't perfect and that they're flawed. Do you remember the first time that you were let down by a hero or an institution that you really believed in a whole lot?
Wow. Yeah, I definitely. So I was an idealist, and I'm still kind of an idealist, right? That kind of was part of what makes you a misfit. But I was definitely more idealistic through my teens, early 20s, and I really wrestled with as I got to know. And I think a lot of teens do this, right? As they learn more about their parents, about school, about church, right? As they learn, these are imperfect people that are a part of these institutions, right? And so I definitely had a lot of that. I think one of the main people that really, like as an individual, that really affected me was Bill Cosby, to be honest. I mean, I know that sounds weird, but because I was older at that point, but Bill Cosby was a father figure to me. I mean, my dad was around and he was involved but besides my own dad and some of the men in my life locally, it was Bill Cosby and Mr. Rogers that raised me. Like this is where I learned what it meant to be a man in a lot of ways and a human in a lot of ways. And so to find out that a lot of the things that people were saying about him were true was very disappointing, right? It was very disheartening in a lot of ways. And so I was kind of an individual and I was a little older, but definitely when I was younger, it was kind of the institutions and I had to, and then of course I become a teacher, even though I know, schools aren't perfect and how do you stay involved in church as a believer if, sometimes sometimes pastors fall and they're corrupt and they have their issues too. They're human. So, I absolutely had to wrestle with a lot of those things. And I had to learn how to have that complexity to see the good that people have done, even though they might be flawed. And I think that's maturity to some degree, right? Is being able to see that people aren't their lowest moment and they're not their highest moment either. Each one of us have some mixture of those, right?
I think that's something that a lot of people, this whole idea of not being able to see the good once you recognize the bad, especially in our institutions, especially in our country. I think certainly I'm almost 100 years old, so I think things are a lot better now than they were when I was a kid, and than they were when I was in my 20s. And I don't see. I see a lot of young people, and not only young people, but older people, kind of denying that. This is a terrible country, and it's so unfair, and it's certainly imperfect, and there certainly are injustices happening. And at the same time, we've made great strides, and we need. It's really important to, I think, recognize that.
Well, and I think that's part of, again, what we have to relay to young people, because young people, and I was the same way, right? You see corruption and you're like, all education is awful or whatever, or you see people fall in the church. I never really looked up to like televangelists and some of those people. So, but still, like as you grow up, you realize, these are imperfect people who are trying to do good things. And it's easy to, especially at a young age, to, the old saying is throw the baby out with the bathwater. It's to say, well, and I think that's part of this clickbait sort of culture that we live in with social media. Complexity doesn't work in a headline. Headlines can't be complex, and so try to make noise and be heard through all the different options as people are scrolling to get them to stop scrolling, and all that mentality. People say very extreme things, and so it's teaching our kids that that's okay. That just because there has been racism in our institutions doesn't mean that every institution is at its heart racist, right? Mm-hmm. There can be some complexity in this, and realizing, like you said, all the strides we've made, to be thankful for them, and that's why we should have relationships with generations, because when people have the perspective, like you're saying, that, man, yes, there's still problems, but this is what we had to deal with, mm-hmm. walking to school uphill both ways in the snow or something. That's a joke, but but still, like you're saying, like, man, we have so many benefits now that we didn't have, and that I think that adds a needed aspect to some of these conversations as we try to legitimately deal with injustices. Mm-hmm. At the same time. It's not an either or. It's a both and. So. Yeah.
I love it. I think, a story like Shield of the King, obviously it sounds like a fun adventure for young adults, would really get into it. I'm imagining I would have loved it as a teenager. But I really, like we do with all the books we celebrate here, really encourage parents to co-read a book like Shield of the King with their teens, with their young adults, because it can lead to some really great conversations. Because there's a really good chance you're not going to be able to sit down with your kids and go, okay, tonight we're going to talk about the Republicans, or tonight we're going to talk about the Democrats. They're like, nah, I don't want to, get away from me, Dad. But if you're sitting down and you're talking about Shield of the King, you're talking about these complex ideas through the context of the story, kids are much more open to doing that.
And that's one of the things I love about fantasy, and that's one of the strengths to me of fantasy and science fiction especially, is that you're totally right. If I sit down with somebody, have coffee, and I tell them, oh, well, here's what I think about Trump. Here's good things, bad things. If they're anti-Trump, then it's going to be, there's nothing good, right? Or if they're pro-Trump, like they might say, oh, you shouldn't criticize him. He's the perfect whatever. And so there's all these sort of ideas that can come up in people's minds when you talk about these real life institutions, systems, whatever, because there's all this context. But when you take the same principles, like there's no Trump character or Biden character in my book, but when you take the same principles and you lay them out with elves and monsters and sword fights and magic, and when you lay them out in the same sort of way, people can be more open to the principles of talking with some of these ideas about, and that's the beauty to me of fantasy, is that it allows people to be a little more open-minded to really delve and ask deeper questions. Yeah. Not that I'm giving people the answer. That's, to me, the purpose of art is to get people to ask the right questions. Mm-hmm. About life, about who they are as people, about what it means to be a hero in this case, in such a situation. And I love having those conversations with young people, and so I totally agree. I think it's an awesome thing to do.
Yeah. I'm curious, because you've have so much contact, not only with your own kids, but with other young adults and teens. What's been the most interesting or surprising question that a young person has asked you in regards to your writing?
Wow, that's a great question. The most surprising question is, I don't know about the most surprising. One of the most surprising is, when's the sequel coming out? It does come to a conclusion, but it's obvious there's going to be more. So I like that, and sometimes it's not surprising, but it's nice to hear the questions from young people who want to be writers, and they want to ask questions about, how did you come up with this idea, and how did you do this, and and so I like having those sort of conversations too, to kind of encourage their imagination, right? Because I think creativity begets more creativity. People read a book and they're using their imagination to imagine the characters and what do they sound like and look like and all that sort of stuff. So they kind of sparks their own imagination. So I'm fortunate that I get to kind of encourage my children, but then also some other people that I know a little more through my wife and their friend and my kids' friends, for them to say, I've thought about writing a book, or I have this idea, and maybe, and so to kind of encourage them to get started, and that they should, and be brave in that sort of sense.
Yeah. I'm curious, this world that you created for Elowin and her dad and the rest of the characters, is this a world that you think you would enjoy living in?
Wow. Parts of it, yes. Definitely. Parts of it I definitely would. Parts of it I definitely would not. I mean, there's definitely some very dark places in my stories, that because I believe we all go through dark times and we encounter dark things in our lives. And so there's definitely some darkness, some dark places, and a little, not super graphic, but, definitely disturbing in some sense, places. But yes, there are other places that it's fun to write in a sort of imaginative, man, I wish this really existed because I would really like to live here. I like writing those places too. So yeah, there's definitely some of those places where it's like, man, that would be a cool place to live. That would be a cool place.
Wow. And so you told us that there's more to come, that this book, there's a conclusion, so we can read it and enjoy it, but there's and leave us wanting some more. So obviously you're going to be telling more of this story, more of this world story. Are you thinking in the future of creating a different world?
So I don't know if I think of doing it as much as I just, it's just kind of happens. So yes, for me at least, one of the, I don't know if it's a negative thing. One of the things I deal with as a writer is I create worlds. I mean, that's part of what I do when I think of a story, I start to think about what world would this be set in. So when I get kind of the seedling sometimes of an idea, sometimes it is a different sort of world. I have a couple main ones that I'm working in now, and I have a limited amount of time, and part of being a good writer is realizing I can't write every book and every world that comes into my brain. But yes, so there are science fiction sort of world building stuff that I work on. There's a whole story that I want to write that's like cowboys and dinosaurs, or there's cowboys riding dinosaurs. I want to write a Western where they're riding dinosaurs. Different things like an alternative West, American West thing if dinosaurs were still around. Those sort of fun ideas I have, pretty often. It's just making sure I have the time to really do it right, because I've written a number of books, so I kind of know, I kind of know what it takes to really go through the process. And so, but no, I have those sort of fun ideas. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, we should tell people where they can go to find out more about Shield of the King, and also have a place to visit frequently to see what new worlds you might be cooking up.
Okay. Yeah. So you can find Shield of the King, Elowin Book 1, on pretty much anywhere you get books. Definitely Amazon, but also Barnes & Noble and those sort of places. We have hardcover. We have a hardcover version, and we have, paperback and ebook. So you've got some different options there. And as far as for me, you can check me out on, I have fun on TikTok. So I'm MB Mooney author on TikTok, and I'm author MB Mooney on Instagram. So I'm on there making noise. I also have a YouTube channel where I share some original stories and do some reviews of movies and books and that sort of thing. It's called Great Stories Change the World. That's my YouTube channel, Great Stories Change the World. And that's been fun because, I get to have sometimes conversations with other authors, or we talk about story and what makes a story great, because, as we've been talking about, I love the themes that we can explore in a great story that really kind of gets people to ask the right questions and think about things. So, yeah, that's that.
Wonderful. We've had a great time speaking to the author of Shield of the King, an epic YA fantasy, from our guest, M.B. Mooney. Hey, my friend, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you, Jed. Thank you so much.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Reading with Your Kids, and will join us for the next exciting episode of the show. We would love for you to connect with us on social media, facebook.com/readingwithyourkids, at Reading With Your Kids on Instagram, and at Jedley Magic on X. We'd also love for you to check out our YouTube channel, youtube.com/readingwithyourkids. On our YouTube channel, you can find just about every episode of the podcast. You can also find all of our STEM is Family Fun and our Drawing with Your Kids videos as well. And of course, we'd love for you to visit our website. Parents, if you go there, you can download our blog and check out our latest Reading with Your Kids Certified Great Read. Authors, if you go to readingwithyourkids.com, you can find out how you can be a guest here on the show and tell thousands of people all over the world about your fantastic children's book. You can also learn about our very effective and very affordable promotional services. And you can also use the contact button up at the top of readingwithyourkids.com to send us a message. Let us know what you love about the show. Let us know what we could be doing better, and let us know who you would like to hear on a future episode of the show. And if you do love the show, we would really appreciate it if you could leave us a review on whatever podcasting platform you find us on. Want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, I want to start by thanking our guest, Jerry Kolber. Please be sure to check out Who Smarted and also MB Mooney. Check out Shield of the King. I want to thank my amazing team, Fatima Khan, Chris Doherty, Rory Grady, Judy Hu, Stella Sheree, Hannah Bosange, Alyssa Montiero, Julia Lipton, Devin Hill. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, and as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place. And you do that every time you read with your kids. I'll be looking for the next episode of Reading with Your Kids.